Two Black Hawk helicopters don't just land on a suburban highway during rush hour for no reason, not unless the world is ending or someone very important has gone missing. The rotor wash from the blades flattened the tall grass along Highway 9, forcing cars to screech to a halt. Drivers stepped out, filming on their phones, terrified and confused. But the soldiers jumping out weren't looking for a terrorist. They weren't looking for a bomb. A captain with a scar on his face sprinted toward a woman walking alone on the shoulder, clutching a cardboard box of personal belongings. He didn't point a weapon at her. He pointed a finger back at the hospital she had just left. "Ma'am, did they just fire you?" When she nodded, stunned, he grabbed his radio. "Command, we found her. Turn the birds around. Tell the general we're bringing the angel back home." The fluorescent lights of St. Jude's Medical Center hummed with a headache-inducing flicker that Nurse Rachel Bennett had learned to ignore over 10 years in the ER. It was 2 a.m., the night shift, when the daytime chaos usually quieted down into the rhythmic beeping of monitors. But tonight, the trauma bay vibrated with tension, focused entirely around bed 4. Rachel adjusted the IV drip, her eyes scanning the vitals of the man lying unconscious in the sheets. He had been brought in as a John Doe, found in an alley 3 blocks from the hospital. No wallet, no phone, just tactical boots worn down at the heels and a faded gray t-shirt clinging to a muscular frame. He was covered in sweat. His temperature had spiked to 104 degrees, and in his delirium he was muttering something that sounded like coordinates. "He's stabilizing, but barely," Rachel whispered to herself, checking the fresh dressing on his side. It looked like a surgical incision that had gone badly septic. This wasn't a wound from a street fight, that much was certain. "Nurse Bennett," the sharp nasal voice of Dr. Gregory Olcott cut through the air like a scalpel. Rachel stiffened. Dr. Olcott was the new chief of surgery, a man who cared more about billing codes and insurance pre-authorizations than patient outcomes. He marched into the trauma bay, wrinkling his nose at the sight of the dirty boots in the corner, the patient's only possession. "Yes, doctor." Rachel didn't look up, focusing on cleaning the wound. "Why is this vagrant occupying a trauma bed?" Olcott snapped, scrolling through the chart on his tablet. "No insurance, no ID. We are not a homeless shelter, Bennett. We have paying patients in the waiting room. Transfer him to the county clinic." Rachel finally looked up. Her blue eyes were tired but fierce. "Dr. Olcott, he has sepsis. His heart rate is unstable. If we move him now, he'll go into cardiac arrest. I've seen infections like this before. It looks like a combat-grade staph infection. He needs high-dose antibiotics and monitoring, not a bus ride to county." Olcott scoffed, stepping closer. His expensive cologne overpowered the smell of antiseptic. "You are Nurse Bennett. You change bedpans and follow orders. You do not diagnose. I am telling you to free up this bed. He is a waste of resources." "He is a human being," Rachel cut in, raising her voice slightly. "I think he's a veteran. Look at the scarring on his shoulder. That's shrapnel." "I don't care if he's the King of England," Olcott hissed, dropping his voice to a menacing whisper. "You have 15 minutes to discharge him. If I come back and he is still here, it won't be him leaving the hospital. It will be you." Olcott spun on his heels and walked out, his white coat billowing behind him. Rachel looked down at the man. His breathing was shallow. Suddenly, he gripped the sheets, his knuckles turning white. "Easy," Rachel soothed, placing a hand on his forehead. "I'm with you." She knew the protocol. She knew the hierarchy. She also knew that moving him was a death sentence. She looked at the clock, 2:15 a.m. Olcott had gone to his office to nap. He wouldn't be back for rounds until 6:30. Rachel made a choice. Instead of discharging him, she wheeled bed 4 into the corner of the trauma bay, behind a heavy curtain usually used for storage. She hooked him up to a fresh bag of vancomycin, an expensive antibiotic she had to bypass the digital dispensing cabinet to get. She sat by him, sponging his forehead with cool water, listening to him mutter through his nightmares. "Echo 2. Position compromised. Get to the chopper," the man groaned, his body thrashing. "You're safe," she whispered. "You're at St. Jude's. I'm Rachel. I'm not going anywhere." For 4 hours she fought his fever. She ignored her other duties, trading favors with the other nurses, begging them to cover her other patients so she could focus on the John Doe. By 6 a.m., his fever broke, his heart rate steadied. He opened his eyes, steel gray and sharp, instantly alert despite his condition. "Where?" His voice was like gravel. "Hospital," Rachel said softly. "You were in bad shape. Septic shock." The man tried to sit up but winced. He looked at Rachel, assessing her like she was a tactical variable. "You stayed?" "I stayed," she nodded. "Dr. Olcott wanted to kick you out," she admitted, pouring him water. "I hid you." The man took the water, his hand trembling slightly. "Thank you. I need to make a call. There's a number in my head. I need a secure line." "We don't have secure lines," Rachel smiled sadly. "Just a dusty landline at the nurse's station." Before he could answer, the curtain was ripped back. The plastic ring screeched against the metal rod. Dr. Olcott stood there, his face a mask of purple rage. Behind him were 2 hospital security guards. "I warned you," Olcott spat, pointing a shaking finger at Rachel. "I gave you a direct order, Bennett. You stole medication, you misused hospital resources, and you disobeyed the chief of surgery. He would have died anyway." Rachel stood up, placing herself between the doctor and the patient. "Look at him. He's conscious. The antibiotics worked." "I don't care," Olcott screamed. "Remove him and take her badge." The guards hesitated. Everyone loved Rachel. She was the heart of the ER. "Now!" Olcott roared. One of the guards, a man named Frank whom Rachel had shared coffee with for years, looked at the floor. "I'm sorry, Rachel." Rachel unclipped her badge. She took the stethoscope from around her neck, the one her father gave her when she graduated nursing school, and placed it on the bedside table. She turned to the man in the bed. "You're stable. Don't let them move you until you feel ready. Drink the water." The man in the bed didn't say a word. He was staring at Olcott with a look that would have terrified a less arrogant man. But Olcott was too blinded by ego to notice. The patient's hand moved subtly under the sheet, tapping a rhythm on his thigh, as if counting. "Get out," Olcott hissed. Rachel grabbed her purse and her coat. She walked out of the trauma bay with her head held high, but her heart was breaking. 10 years of service, gone in an instant because she did the right thing. The automatic doors of the ER slid open, and the cold morning air hit Rachel like a physical blow. It was raining, a miserable, stinging drizzle that soaked her instantly. She realized with a pang that she had left her umbrella in her locker. She wasn't allowed back in to get it. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment, looking up at the building. St. Jude's had been her life. She had missed Christmases, birthdays, and anniversaries inside those walls. She had held the hands of the dying and celebrated with the families of the survivors. And now she was just a trespasser. She checked her pockets. She had her car keys, but then she remembered. Her car, an old Honda Civic, was in the shop for transmission trouble. She had taken the bus to work. The next bus didn't run until 7 a.m. on Sundays. It was barely 6:15. "Damn it," she muttered, wiping rain from her eyelashes. Her apartment was 5 miles away, a 5-mile walk along the highway shoulder in the rain. It seemed like a fitting end to the worst night of her life. She started walking. The rubber of her nursing clogs squeaked on the wet asphalt. Cars zoomed past, spraying her legs with dirty water. She clutched the small cardboard box Olcott had graciously allowed her to pack, a photo of her dog, a coffee mug, and a spare pair of socks. As she walked, the anger began to fade, replaced by a crushing fear. How would she pay rent? Who would hire a nurse fired for insubordination and theft? Olcott would blacklist her. He was petty enough to ensure she never worked in this city again. She was 34, single, and unemployed. She was about 2 miles from the hospital, walking along a stretch of road bordered by a large open field used for local fairs in the summer. The rain was pouring harder now. She was shivering uncontrollably. "Just keep moving, Rachel," she told herself, 1 foot in front of the other. Then she heard it. At first, it was a low, thumping sound, a vibration in her chest more than a noise. She thought it might be a heavy truck approaching from behind, so she stepped further onto the grass. But the sound wasn't coming from the road. It was coming from the sky. The thumping grew into a rhythmic whomp, whomp, whomp that beat against the air. It was loud, deafeningly loud. Rachel stopped and looked up. Through the gray mist and rain, 2 dark shapes materialized. They were massive black helicopters, low and aggressive, banking sharply over the tree line. These weren't the red and white medevac choppers she was used to. These were military, matte black, with no markings she could easily see, bristling with antennas and external pods. "What on earth?" she breathed, shielding her eyes from the rotor wash. The lead helicopter pulled its nose up, slowing rapidly. It hovered directly over the road, barely 50 feet off the ground. The downdraft was immense. It ripped the cardboard box from Rachel's frozen hands. Her coffee mug shattered on the asphalt. The photo of her dog tumbled into the wet grass. She covered her head, crouching down in terror. Was it a crash landing? Was there an emergency? The helicopter didn't crash. It landed right in the middle of the 4-lane road, blocking traffic in both directions. The second chopper touched down in the field beside her, its rotors still spinning, slicing the grass like a giant lawnmower. Cars slammed on their brakes. People were screaming. Before the skids of the lead chopper even fully settled, the side doors flew open. 4 men jumped out. They weren't wearing standard army fatigues. They were in high-end tactical gear, multicam pants, combat shirts, heavy plate carriers, and helmets with night vision mounts. They carried rifles slung low across their chests, ready but not aimed. They moved with a speed and fluidity that was frightening. They fanned out, securing a perimeter around the bird. One man, the leader, didn't look at the traffic. He didn't look at the stunned drivers. He was scanning the roadside. He spotted Rachel, crouching by the guardrail, soaked and shivering. He sprinted toward her. He was a giant of a man with a thick beard and a scar running through his eyebrow. He stopped 5 feet away, raising his hands to show he wasn't a threat. "Ma'am," he shouted over the roar of the engines. "Are you Nurse Bennett? Rachel Bennett?" Rachel couldn't speak. She just stared at him. "Ma'am," he barked again, urgent but respectful. "Look at me. Are you the nurse who was just at St. Jude's, the one treating the John Doe?" Rachel nodded slowly, her teeth chattering. Yes, that's me." The soldier tapped his headset. "Command, we have the asset. Repeating, we have the Angel. Condition is wet and freezing, but secure." He extended a hand. "You need to come with us, ma'am." "What? No." Rachel backed up against the guardrail. "I got fired. I didn't do anything wrong. I just gave him antibiotics." The soldier's expression softened. He stepped closer, ignoring the rain drumming on his helmet. "We know. That man you were treating is Captain Elias Thorne of the 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment Delta. He is our commander." Rachel's eyes went wide. The guy in bed 4. "He woke up enough to make one call," the soldier continued. "He told us what happened. He told us you got kicked out because you saved his life." "I was just doing my job," Rachel stammered. "Well, now we're doing ours," the soldier said grimly. "General Higgins, that's Captain Thorne's father, is already en route to the hospital. But Captain Thorne refused to let anyone touch him until you were brought back. He said, and I quote, 'Get me the nurse who refused to let me die, or I am walking out of here with my IVs dragging behind me.'" The soldier gestured to the open door of the Black Hawk. "Please, ma'am, we have orders to retrieve you. And frankly, I wouldn't want to be Dr. Olcott when we get back there." Rachel looked at her broken mug on the road. She looked at the traffic jam caused by 2 military gunships sent specifically for her. She looked at the soldier's outstretched hand. She took it. "Let's go," she said. The soldier helped her up into the cabin. Someone threw a warm wool blanket over her shoulders. As the helicopter lifted off, banking sharply back toward St. Jude's, Rachel looked down at the cars. Down there, she wasn't walking anymore. She was flying to war, and for the first time in her life, she had an army at her back. The roof of St. Jude's Medical Center was not rated for a Sikorsky UH-60 Black Hawk, let alone 2 of them. The structural integrity was meant for lighter medical transport choppers, but the pilots of the 161st Special Operations Aviation Regiment didn't seem to care about hospital building codes. They set the machines down with a bone-rattling thud that shook dust from the ceiling tiles of the trauma center 4 floors below. Inside the lobby, the chaos had fully metastasized. Dr. Gregory Olcott was standing by the nurses' station, screaming into a telephone receiver, his face a mottled map of indignation. "I don't care who they are. This is a private facility. Tell the police to remove these unauthorized aircraft from my roof immediately, or I will sue the city into bankruptcy." He slammed the phone down and turned to a huddled group of nurses and residents. "Get back to work. Why are you all standing around? If I see one more person staring at the ceiling, you are fired, just like Bennett." The elevator doors at the end of the hallway dinged. Usually this sound preceded the arrival of a gurney or a cafeteria cart. This time the doors slid open to reveal a wall of multicam. 6 operators stepped out, forming a phalanx. In the center walked a man in dress uniform, not combat gear. General Thomas Higgins was a legend in the special operations community, a man whose silence was rumored to be scarier than his yelling. He walked with a cane, a souvenir from Fallujah, but he moved with the momentum of a freight train. And beside him, wrapped in a gray wool army blanket with wet hair plastered to her forehead, was Rachel Bennett. The lobby went silent. You could hear the hum of the vending machine down the hall. Olcott's jaw dropped. He blinked, looking between the soldiers and Rachel. His brain was trying to compute the impossible equation in front of him. What did this mean? General Higgins didn't stop until he was nose to nose with the surgeon. Higgins was 60, with silver hair and eyes like frozen flint. "Are you Dr. Olcott?" "I'm the chief surgeon," Olcott stammered, trying to regain his stature. "And you are trespassing in a sterile zone. I demand you remove these weapons and this terminated employee immediately." Higgins ignored the demands. He turned to the soldier on his left. "Secure the floor. No one in or out without my authorization. Cut the landlines. Jam cellular signals within a 200-foot radius. This is now a secure forward operating base." "Roger that, General," the soldier barked, moving instantly to the exits. "You can't do that," Olcott squeaked. "This is a hospital." "Correction," Higgins said, his voice deadly calm. "This is the location of a high-value asset currently in critical condition, an asset you tried to throw out like garbage." Higgins stepped back and pointed at Rachel. "Nurse Bennett is no longer your employee, Doctor. She has been conscripted as a specialized medical consultant for the Department of Defense. She effectively outranks you. She is Captain Thorne's primary care provider. You will get her whatever she needs. If she asks for a scalpel, you hand it to her. If she asks for the moon, you start building a rocket." Olcott's face turned a shade of pale violet. He looked at Rachel with pure venom. She is a nurse. She barely passed her boards 10 years ago. I checked her file. She is incompetent to handle trauma of this magnitude." Rachel stepped forward. The shock of the helicopter ride was fading, replaced by the familiar adrenaline of the ER. She looked at Olcott, then at the terrified staff, and finally at Frank, the security guard who had apologized to her earlier. Frank gave her a subtle thumbs up. "Where is he?" Rachel asked, her voice steady. "Where is Captain Thorne?" Olcott crossed his arms. "I had him transferred to the basement holding area, pending transport to the county hospital. He is no longer my problem." Rachel's eyes widened. "The basement? It's 50 degrees down there. He's fighting sepsis. The cold will send him into shock." She didn't wait for permission. She took off running down the hall toward the service elevators, shedding the wool blanket as she went. General Higgins gestured to 2 of his men. "Go with her. If anyone stands in her way, move them." Olcott sputtered. "General, I will have your badge for this. I know senators." Higgins leaned in close, his voice dropping to a whisper that chilled the room. "Doctor, my son is lying in your basement. If he dies because you wanted to save money on heating, I won't need a badge, and you won't need a lawyer. Do you understand?" Olcott swallowed hard. For the first time, the arrogance cracked, revealing the coward underneath. The basement holding area was essentially a storage room for broken equipment and overflowing files. It smelled of mildew and old dust. Rachel burst through the double doors, the 2 Delta operators flanking her. In the corner, on a gurney with a broken wheel, lay Captain Elias Thorne. He was shivering violently, his teeth chattering so hard it sounded like bone grinding on bone. The IV bag Rachel had hung earlier was empty. The line had backed up with blood. "Elias!" Rachel rushed to him. Her hands instantly checked his carotid pulse. It was thready and fast, too fast. "Rachel," Elias mumbled, his eyes unfocused. "Hostiles. South Ridge." "No hostiles," she said, ripping open the wet top of his scrubs to expose his thermal undershirt, which he immediately used to cover his chest. "Get me a blanket," she yelled at the soldiers, "and get this gurney moving. We need to get him to the ICU, now." The soldiers, men trained to kill with their bare hands, looked momentarily lost before sprinting to find anything warm. They came back with a tarp and a janitor's jacket. It had to do. They raced him back up to the ICU. The hospital takeover was complete. The Delta team had cleared the entire West Wing, moving other patients to the East Wing. The ICU was now a fortress. Rachel worked feverishly. She reestablished 2 large-bore IV lines, pushing warm fluids to combat the hypothermia. She hooked him up to the advanced cardiac monitor. The numbers were bad, BP 80/50, pulse 140. But it was the blood work results, which came back 30 minutes later, that made her stop cold. She stared at the computer screen at the central station. General Higgins stood behind her, looking over her shoulder. "Talk to me, Nurse Bennett," Higgins said. "He's stabilizing. His temp is coming up," Rachel said, biting her lip. "But these white blood cell counts, they don't make sense. If he had a staph infection—" Olcott's voice came from the doorway. He was being escorted by the hospital administrator, a nervous woman named Mrs. Gable. Standard combat sepsis. He needs vancomycin, which you already stole. Rachel ignored the jab. No, look at the eosinophils and the liver enzymes. They are skyrocketing. Sepsis attacks organs, yes, but this pattern, it looks like toxicity. She spun around to face the general. Sir, where exactly was he? I need to know the environment he was operating in. Higgins hesitated. That is classified. General, Rachel said firmly, your son is dying, not from an infection, but from something else. If I treat the infection, I'm just putting a Band-Aid on a bullet hole. I need to know. Higgins looked at his men, then back at Rachel. He was in the Golden Triangle, raiding a synthetic opioid lab. There were experimental compounds. Rachel snapped her fingers. Chemical exposure. It's not staph. It's a mimetic agent. He was exposed to a neurotoxin that mimics infection symptoms while shutting down the autonomic nervous system. Absurd, Olcott scoffed. You watch too many movies, Bennett. You will kill him with your fantasies. I am ordering a dialysis machine to filter his blood for sepsis. Dialysis will kill him, Rachel screamed. If you filter his blood now, the strain on his heart will cause cardiac arrest. He needs an antidote. He needs atropine and pralidoxime immediately. Olcott stepped forward, physically trying to block Rachel from the medication cart. I will not let you push a nerve agent antidote into a septic patient. That is malpractice. The room went dead silent. The heart rate monitor for bed 1, Elias's bed, began to alarm. A fast, high-pitched wail, ventricular fibrillation. He's coding, Rachel shouted. She shoved Olcott. It wasn't a gentle push. She put her shoulder into his chest and checked him backward into a linen cart. He fell in a heap of sheets. Code blue, she yelled. Charge defibrillator to 200 joules. Rachel grabbed the paddles. The soldiers stood frozen, unsure whether to shoot the doctor or help the nurse. Clear, Rachel yelled, pressing the pads to Elias's chest. Thump, his body jerked with the shock. She looked at the monitor, still flatline. 300 joules, clear. Thump, still flatline. Come on, soldier, she whispered, tears stinging her eyes. Don't you dare quit now. I walked 5 miles in the rain for you. She started chest compressions, hard, rhythmic, breaking ribs if necessary. Push 1 milligram epinephrine, she commanded one of the other nurses who had snuck back onto the floor, a young girl named Sarah who looked terrified but grabbed the syringe. 2 minutes, Rachel counted, sweat dripping from her forehead. Let him go, Olcott sneered from the floor, adjusting his glasses. He's gone. You killed him. Shut up, General Higgins roared, pulling his sidearm and pointing it directly at Olcott's head. One more word, doctor, and you join him. Stop compressions, Rachel said, breathless. She stared at the monitor. Nothing. Then a blip. Then another. A chaotic but sustainable rhythm returned. Sinus tachycardia, Rachel exhaled. He's back. She didn't hesitate. She grabbed the atropine syringe from the crash cart. She jammed it into the IV port. Pushing atropine. If I'm wrong, this will stop his heart again. If I'm right, his vitals will level out in 30 seconds. She depressed the plunger. Everyone watched the monitor. 10 seconds, 20 seconds. The heart rate began to drop. 140, 130, 110. Blood pressure climbed. 90/60, 110/70. Rachel leaned against the bed rail, exhaling a breath she felt like she had been holding for an hour. He's stabilizing, she whispered. It was the toxin. General Higgins holstered his weapon. He looked at Rachel with a reverence usually reserved for religious figures. Then he looked at Olcott. Get him out of here, Higgins ordered his men. Lock him in his office. If he touches a phone, break his fingers. 3 days passed. The ICU at St. Jude's had become a bizarre mix of sterile medicine and forward operating base. Soldiers slept in the waiting room chairs. Pizza boxes were stacked next to ammo crates. Rachel hadn't gone home. She slept on a cot in Elias's room, waking every hour to check his numbers. Elias was awake. He was weak, but the gray steel was back in his eyes. You have a heavy hand with those needles, Bennett, Elias rasped, trying to shift in the bed. Rachel smiled, adjusting his pillows. She was exhausted, wearing fresh scrubs the military had sourced for her. You have thick skin, Captain. Makes it hard to find a vein. Call me Elias, he said softly. I think you earned that right. He looked at her. Really looked at her. My father told me what you did. The walk. The confrontation with Olcott. The diagnosis. I was just doing my job, Rachel said, looking down at her hands. Olcott, he's trying to strip my license. Even with your father here, the hospital board is furious. They say I assaulted a senior physician and administered unauthorized narcotics. Let them try, Elias said, his voice hardening. I'll buy this damn hospital and fire the board if I have to. It's not that simple, Rachel sighed. Politics. Even the military has to answer to lawyers eventually. She checked his drip. You need rest. Your liver enzymes are almost normal, but your body took a massive hit. Rachel. Elias reached out and grabbed her hand. His grip was strong again. Why? You didn't know me. I was just a homeless guy in dirty boots. You lost your career for a stranger. Rachel met his gaze. My brother. He was a Marine. He came home different. He died in a VA waiting room because no one looked past the dirty clothes and the smell of alcohol. I promised myself that would never happen on my watch. Not again. Silence hung between them, heavy with unspoken emotion. Elias squeezed her hand. You're a good woman, Rachel Bennett. Suddenly, the door to the room opened. It wasn't the general. It wasn't a soldier. It was a nurse. Rachel didn't recognize the tall man with the buzz cut, wearing scrubs and a mask. He was pushing a medication cart. Routine rounds, the man mumbled, keeping his head down. Dr. Olcott ordered a sedative to help him sleep. Rachel frowned. Dr. Olcott is under house arrest in his office. I'm handling all meds for this patient. The man froze. Rachel's instincts, honed by years of dealing with drug seekers and violent patients in the ER, flared up. She looked at the man's feet. They weren't nursing clogs or sneakers. They were heavy black leather boots, expensive ones, and on his wrist, barely visible under the cuff of the scrub shirt, was a tattoo. A black scorpion. Rachel's blood ran cold. She remembered Elias's delirious muttering the first night. Scorpion, they knew we were coming. Hey, Rachel said, sharp and loud. Step away from the cart. The man looked up. His eyes were cold and dead. He reached into the pocket of his scrubs. He wasn't reaching for a stethoscope. Gun! Elias shouted, trying to throw himself out of bed despite his weakness. The assassin pulled a silenced pistol. Rachel didn't think. She didn't have a weapon. She had a metal surgical tray on the bedside table. She grabbed the heavy kidney-shaped dish and hurled it with all her might. It struck the assassin in the face just as he fired. The bullet went wide, shattering the glass window behind Elias. The assassin stumbled back, blood pouring from his nose. He raised the gun again, aiming directly at Rachel. No! Elias roared, ripping the IVs from his arm and lunging at the man. His weakened body was fueled by pure rage. They crashed into the med cart, sending vials and syringes scattering across the room. The assassin was stronger. He backhanded Elias, knocking him against the wall. He turned the gun toward the captain, who was gasping on the floor. But before he could pull the trigger, a force slammed into his back. Rachel had grabbed an oxygen tank from the corner of the room, a solid steel cylinder. She swung it like a baseball bat. It connected with the back of the assassin's skull with a sickening crunch. The man crumpled to the floor and didn't move. The door burst open. General Higgins and 3 Delta operators stormed in, weapons raised. They saw the unconscious assassin on the floor. They saw Elias propped against the wall, bleeding from his IV sites. And they saw Rachel Bennett standing over the hitman, clutching an oxygen tank, her chest heaving, looking like a warrior goddess. General Higgins looked at the tattoo on the assassin's wrist. He paled. We have a leak, Higgins whispered. This wasn't a random hit. They found us. Rachel dropped the tank, her hands starting to shake. He said he was a nurse. Elias pulled himself up, using the bed for support. He looked at Rachel with an intensity that burned. You saved me, he said, breathless again. We're not safe here, Rachel said, her voice trembling but decisive. If they can get a fake nurse into the ICU, they can get a bomb in here. Higgins nodded grimly. She's right. We need to move. Now. Where? Elias asked. Rachel looked at the general. My family has a cabin, up north, off the grid. No cell service, no internet. If you want him to live, we have to vanish. Higgins looked at the civilian nurse who had just neutralized an armed assassin. He realized he wasn't looking at a civilian anymore. Lead the way, Nurse Bennett, the general said. The convoy of black SUVs sped down the interstate, a blur of tinted glass and government plates. Inside the lead vehicle, Rachel gripped the steering wheel of her late father's old Ford pickup truck, which General Higgins had insisted take the middle position in the formation for camouflage. Elias sat in the passenger seat, a rifle resting on his lap. His face was pale, but his eyes scanned the tree line. "You're bleeding through your dressing," Rachel said, her eyes flicking to his arm for a second before returning to the wet asphalt. "I'll live," Elias grunted. "How far to the cabin?" 20 miles, she replied. "It's up on Blackwood Ridge, old logging road. Your SUVs might get stuck in the mud." "My SUVs survived the mountains of Afghanistan," Higgins's voice came over the radio. "Lead on, Bennett." The cabin was a relic of another time. A sturdy structure of rough-hewn pine, perched on a cliff overlooking a dense valley of spruce and fir. No electricity, just a generator in the shed. No cell reception, just the wind howling through the valley. They arrived just as the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in bruises of purple and red. The Delta team moved with practiced efficiency. 2 men took sniper positions on the roof. 2 more mined the perimeter of the driveway with claymores. Rachel helped Elias inside. The air in the cabin was stale and cold. She knelt by the fireplace, arranging kindling with shaking hands. "Hey," Elias said, kneeling beside her. He put a hand on her shoulder. "Stop." Rachel froze. She looked at him, and the tears she had been holding back since the hospital finally spilled over. "They tried to kill you right in front of me. That man, he had dead eyes. Elias, he didn't care." "I know," Elias said softly, "but he failed, because of you." He took the match from her hand and lit the fire. As the flames caught, casting dancing shadows on the walls, the cabin warmed up. Rachel set up a makeshift clinic on the kitchen table, cleaning Elias's wounds and checking his vitals. "You're tough," Elias murmured as she wrapped fresh gauze around his arm. "Tougher than half the men I served with. I'm not a soldier." Rachel shook her head. "I'm just stubborn, that's all." Elias smiled. "Stubborn enough to refuse to die. That's all a soldier is." Night fell. The general sat by the window, watching the darkness through thermal binoculars. The team rotated shifts. Rachel and Elias sat on a rug by the fire, sharing a can of peaches from the pantry. For a moment, the war felt far away. They talked about her dog, about his childhood in Texas, about the quiet life they both secretly dreamed of. But the peace was a lie. At 300 hours, the radio on the general's vest hissed. "Contact, Sector North, movement in the trees, multiple heat signatures." Higgins stood up instantly. "How many?" 20, maybe 30. They're spreading out, no lights. These are professionals." Elias grabbed his rifle, grimacing as his muscles protested. "They found us. Fast. Too fast." Rachel's mind raced. "How? We ditched the phones. We swept the cars for trackers." Elias looked at the medical bag Rachel had brought from the hospital, the one she had hastily packed from the supply closet before fleeing. He dumped it out. A small, blinking red light pulsed from inside a box of sterile gauze. A beacon. Elias spat. "The fake nurse. He must have planted it in the cart before he entered the room. We led them right to us." The first shot shattered the window, blowing out the oil lamp on the table. "Get down!" Higgins roared, flipping the heavy oak table onto its side for cover. Gunfire erupted from the tree line. It was a deluge of lead. Bullets chewed through the wooden walls of the cabin like termites. The sound was deafening. The Delta operators returned fire, their suppressed rifles coughing rhythmically. "They're flanking!" the sniper on the roof yelled over the comms. "They have RPGs!" Whoosh! Boom! An explosion rocked the south side of the cabin. The wall disintegrated, showering the room in splinters and drywall. Rachel covered her head, coughing in the dust. "We can't hold this," Higgins yelled, firing a burst through the breach in the wall. "They have numbers and heavy weapons. We need an exit strategy." "There is no exit," Elias shouted back, changing magazines. "Truck is destroyed. SUVs are pinned down." Rachel looked at the layout of the room. She looked at the floorboards near the pantry. "The root cellar!" she screamed over the noise of the firefight. Higgins looked at her. "What?" "My grandfather used it during Prohibition to hide moonshine." Rachel crawled toward the pantry. "It's a tunnel. It comes out in the creek bed 200 yards down the ravine. It will dump us behind their line." Elias looked at Higgins. "Go. Take the team. Flank them." "I'm not leaving you," Higgins argued. "I can't run," Elias said, pointing to his leg, which had taken shrapnel during the explosion. "I'll hold them here. Rachel stays to load for me. You circle around and hit them from the rear. It's the only way." Higgins hesitated for a split second, then nodded. "Give him hell, son." The general and the 4 operators vanished into the pantry, prying up the floorboards and sliding into the darkness of the earth. Rachel and Elias were alone. The shooting outside stopped. The enemy was reloading, preparing for the final breach. "Do you know how to use this?" Elias asked, handing Rachel a 9mm pistol. Rachel took the cold steel in her hands. She was trembling. "Point and shoot. Don't jerk the trigger," he instructed. "Exhale. Squeeze." He dragged himself to the pile of rubble that used to be the south wall. "Here they come." Shadows moved in the smoke, men in black tactical gear moving cautiously. They thought everyone inside was dead or suppressed. "Wait," Elias whispered. The first man stepped through the hole in the wall. Pop, pop. Elias dropped him with a double tap to the chest. Chaos returned. The room filled with smoke and noise. Rachel crouched behind the overturned table, clutching the gun. A figure loomed in the doorway to her left, a flanker Elias hadn't seen. He raised his rifle, aiming at Elias's exposed back. Rachel didn't think. She stood up. She exhaled. She squeezed. The gun kicked hard in her hand. The man in the doorway jerked back, clutching his shoulder, and fell. "Nice shot," Elias yelled, suppressing another attacker, but they were out of time. A grenade rolled across the floor, coming to rest just feet from them. "Grenade!" Elias threw himself over Rachel, covering her with his body. The explosion was deafening. The world went white, then black. Rachel woke up to the taste of ash and the screaming silence that follows an explosion. For a terrifying minute, she couldn't remember how to breathe. The air in the cabin was thick with dust, swirling in the beams of sunlight that poked through the ruined roof. She coughed, a violent spasm that rattled her bruised ribs and pushed a heavy pine beam off her legs. Her hands were raw, nails broken. She crawled through the debris, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "Elias!" Her voice was a broken wheeze. "Elias!" He was lying near the remains of the fireplace, half buried under drywall and shattered furniture. He wasn't moving. Rachel scrambled over the wreckage, ignoring the sharp pain in her knee. She reached him. Her trembling fingers pressed against the carotid artery on his neck. A pause. An eternity of silence. And then a strong, rhythmic thumping against her fingertips. He groaned, his eyes fluttering open. They were unfocused at first, glassy with concussion, before sharpening into that familiar steel gray. He looked at Rachel, at the soot on her face, the blood matting her hair, and he tried to smile. "We won," he rasped. Before Rachel could answer, the front door, hanging by one hinge, was kicked in. Light flooded the dark room. Rachel instinctively reached for the gun lying in the dust, but a boot gently stepped on the barrel. She looked up to see General Thomas Higgins standing over them. He was covered in mud, his uniform torn, but he looked like a god of war. Behind him, through the gaps in the walls, Rachel could see Delta operators clearing the perimeter, zip-tying the few surviving mercenaries. "Easy, Bennett," Higgins said, his voice uncharacteristically soft. "Clear. Threat neutralized." He knelt down, checking his son's pupils. "You two held the line against 30 armed combatants. I've seen seasoned operators break under less pressure." Rachel slumped back against a pile of rubble. The adrenaline finally left her system, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion. "It wasn't just a hit squad," she murmured, looking at the destroyed cabin. "They knew exactly where we were. They knew everything." "We know," Higgins said grimly. "We recovered their comms. We found the source of the leak." His jaw tightened. "And we are going to fix it, today." 48 hours later, the atrium of St. Jude's Medical Center had been transformed into a media circus. News vans lined the streets, their satellite dishes pointed at the hospital entrance. Inside, a podium had been set up in front of the donor wall, bathed in the harsh white light of camera flashes. The story had leaked, or rather, a version of it had. A hostage situation involving a decorated war hero and a disgruntled nurse. Dr. Gregory Olcott stood at the podium, basking in the attention. He was wearing a crisp, tailored suit under a spotless white coat. His hair was perfectly coiffed. He looked the picture of administrative competence and solemn concern. "Thank you all for coming," Olcott said, leaning into the cluster of microphones. His voice was smooth, practiced, oozing fake sincerity. "It has been a harrowing week for the St. Jude's family. We pride ourselves on healing, on safety. But sometimes, danger comes from within." He paused for dramatic effect, looking out at the sea of reporters. "Nurse Rachel Bennett was a troubled woman," Olcott continued, shaking his head sadly. "We saw the signs: erratic behavior, insubordination, emotional instability. When I terminated her employment for theft, she snapped. I deeply regret that she managed to abduct Captain Thorne, a critical patient under our care. We are working with authorities, but we must prepare for the worst. Given Captain Thorne's condition, it is unlikely he survived the ordeal." A reporter from Channel 5 raised a hand. "Doctor, are you saying the nurse is responsible for his death?" "I am saying," Olcott said, adjusting his glasses, "that Rachel Bennett is a danger to society, and I blame myself for not acting sooner to protect my patients from her incompetence." Camera flashes blinded him. Olcott reveled in it. He had spun the narrative perfectly. He was the hero doctor. She was the villain. The cartel money was already in his offshore account. He had won. "Are there any more questions?" Olcott asked, a smug smile touching his lips. "I have one." A deep voice boomed from the back of the atrium. The sound cut through the murmur of the crowd like a clap of thunder. Heads turned, cameras swiveled, the heavy glass automatic doors at the main entrance slid open. They didn't just open, they seemed to part way for a procession. Captain Elias Thorne walked in. He wasn't in a hospital gown, he wasn't on a gurney, he was upright. On his right walked General Higgins, flanked by 2 military police officers, and on his left walked Rachel Bennett. She wasn't in handcuffs, she wasn't in scrubs. She wore a simple blazer and dark jeans, her hair pulled back. She had a healing cut on her forehead and bruises on her cheek, badges of honor. She didn't try to hide them. She didn't look down. She looked straight at the podium. Olcott's face went the color of old milk. He gripped the edges of the podium so hard the wood creaked. "Security!" he shrieked, his voice cracking. "Security! Arrest that woman! She is a fugitive!" 2 hospital guards stepped forward tentatively. "Stand down!" General Higgins barked. The command echoed off the marble walls, freezing the guards in place. "Anyone who touches a member of my team answers to the United States Army." Elias continued his slow, painful march to the stage. Reporters parted like the Red Sea, sensing a story far bigger than the one they had been fed. Elias climbed the 3 steps to the stage. He stood next to Olcott, towering over the surgeon. "Dr. Olcott claims I was kidnapped," Elias said, leaning into the microphone. His voice was calm but carried a lethal weight. "He claims Nurse Bennett is incompetent. He claims she is dangerous." Elias looked at Rachel, who had taken her place at the foot of the stage. "The truth is," Elias said, turning his gaze back to the terrified surgeon, "Rachel Bennett is the only reason I'm breathing. And Dr. Olcott? He didn't just fire her. He tried to sell me." A gasp rippled through the room. "That's a lie," Olcott screamed, sweat beading on his forehead. "He is delirious. The sepsis has rotted his brain. Don't listen to him." Elias reached into his dress uniform pocket with his good hand. He pulled out a small black digital recorder, the device seized from the assassin at the cabin. "We found the man you sent to kill us," Elias said. He pressed play and held the device to the microphone. Static hissed through the speakers, followed by a voice. It was low but unmistakable, the nasal, arrogant tone of Olcott. "The nurse is a problem. She knows about the neurotoxin. If Thorne survives, the cartel loses the formula, and I lose my payout. Kill him, kill the nurse, make it look like a botched robbery in the woods. I want the remaining $2 million wired to the Cayman account by morning." Silence. Absolute, horrified silence hung over the atrium. Olcott stumbled back, knocking over a pitcher of water. "That's AI! That's a deepfake! I never said that!" Rachel walked up the steps. She walked right up to Olcott, invading his personal space. She looked him in the eye, and for the first time, the arrogant doctor looked small. "You broke your oath, Gregory," she said. Her voice was steady and clear enough for the front row to hear. "First, do no harm. You sold a soldier's life for money. You tried to ruin my life because I did my job." General Higgins nodded toward the back of the room. "Federal agents, take him." 6 FBI agents in windbreakers swarmed the stage. They didn't stand on ceremony. They spun Olcott around, slamming him against the podium he had just been preaching from. As the handcuffs clicked around his wrists, Olcott began to weep, screaming about his lawyers, about his tenure, about how this was all a mistake. Rachel watched him get dragged away, his heels skidding on the polished floor. She saw Frank, the security guard by the door, wearing a wide grin. He gave her a salute. She smiled back. As the chaos of the arrest consumed the room, Elias turned to Rachel. The adrenaline was fading, and he was leaning heavily on a cane. His face was pale. "You okay?" he asked softly, ignoring the reporters shouting questions. Rachel looked around the hospital. It had been her world for 10 years. She saw the faces of her former colleagues, some ashamed, some jubilant. "I think I'm officially unemployed," she said, a dry laugh escaping her lips. And I guess my medical license is still suspended. Elias smiled, and it transformed his scarred face. Actually, that's not true. The medical board reviewed the case this morning. Your license is active. In fact, you have a commendation pending. I don't think I want to work here anymore, Rachel admitted, looking at the spot where Olcott had stood. Too many ghosts. Good, Elias said, because I have a job offer for you. The military is creating a new medical support protocol for special operations. We need a liaison, someone who can think on their feet, who isn't afraid of brass, and who can shoot a 9mm if the day goes sideways. Rachel raised an eyebrow. Does it pay well? Better than here, Elias said. Benefits include full dental and, well, me. Rachel looked at him. She saw the man who had shielded her from a grenade, the man who had walked through fire to clear her name. And the boss? She asked playfully. Is he hard to work with? He's stubborn, Elias admitted, stepping closer, but he's very loyal. Rachel took his good arm, supporting him. I'll take the job, but only if I get to fly the chopper. Elias laughed, a warm, genuine sound that felt like the final closing of a dark chapter. We'll see, Nurse Bennett, we'll see. They walked out of the hospital together into the bright afternoon sun, leaving the cameras and the corruption behind. Rachel Bennett had walked home in the rain a victim, but she walked out into the sun a warrior. And for the first time in a long time, she knew exactly where she was going. 2 Black Hawk helicopters don't shut down a civilian highway for just anyone. When Nurse Rachel Bennett got fired for saving a homeless John Doe, she thought her life was over. She walked home in the rain, shivering and broken, but little did she know, the homeless man she saved was a Delta Force captain with a bounty on his head. Suddenly, the sky roared, soldiers rappelled onto the asphalt. They didn't come to arrest her. They came to salute her. And the man who fired her was about to learn that you never mess with a soldier's guardian angel. What a ride. Rachel went from being fired to fighting off assassins in a remote cabin. It just goes to show that doing the right thing, even when it costs you everything, is always worth it. Karma didn't just catch up to Dr. Olcott, it hit him with the full force of the U.S. Army. Hope you enjoyed this roller coaster of a story. If you did, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. What would you have done in Rachel's shoes? Would you have stayed to treat the patient or followed orders? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story. We have plenty more tales of heroism, revenge, and justice coming your way. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.